Hi everybody, today we're going to start painting our projects. That is, if you've masked out the whites and details. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there is a video that you can watch on how to do that. But this yellow stuff is masking fluid and it's used to protect the whites and the details. So basically what I'm going to do is, if you noticed, I taped down already my paper onto a piece of cardboard. And I also taped down my 3 photo references. That way I don't lose them, and that way they are right where I need them when I'm painting. The other thing you need to make sure you do, just so that you don't lose your paper and it's easy for us to find, is write your name on your cardboard. Okay, so make sure you've done that. Now, you are going to use the pans of paint, or you could also try using the tube paint. So this is new. We haven't used this before, but the tube paint is really small for a reason. A little bit goes a long way, and this will last you a very long time. So if you decide you want to try the tube paint, you are going to, and you can share with somebody at your table, so you're going to just write your name on a piece of tape. Let's say that I was sharing with Miss Gaillard. So I would write Carol Gaillard. And then I would put this on my palette, maybe underneath. Is probably a better place for it. You do not need to wash this out. You can just wipe out the center so it's clean. And again, you could share this with like 2 people even, so a total of 3 people. Now when you're mixing the paint, you could also use, one of the other palettes if you need, because one person could use this and somebody else could use another palette. You see, I put just a dime size amount. This should last a long time. I still have paints in the same tube I used for like 3 or 4 22 by 30 paintings. So, again, it should last a while. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe start with my background. And I do want to paint the whole background. You don't have to. You could decide just to paint the animals. Alright, that's up to you. But I want to have a subtle background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up a little bit of Payne's Gray with my blue. And that's going to give it a stormy feel. Now, before I do that, I should probably clean up that smudge and see if it can erase off. So again, this rubber eraser, the kneaded eraser, just go over any areas and make sure it's as clean as possible before you start painting. And that's good craftsmanship. I'm not sure what this smudge is. I'll just have to cover it up with paint. Alright, so you want to remember all the skills that you've learned. So I'm going to wet the paper first. Not the bird, I don't want it to bleed in, but it's going to get a little wet, so I'll just have to keep that in mind. But I'm going to wet the background first. Now remember, I can go right over these leaves that I drew because they're masked out to preserve the details. So I can just go right over it. So again, I'm just thinking about the background right now. And not so much the birds. Now I'm going to take my Payne's Gray. You could also just use, look at your color mixing charts, why we did that. And I'm going to add a little bit of blue. And I'm going to see if I like that. And I do kind of like that for the top part. Then I might add just a little more blue. Allow it to mix in. I think that's too blue. So I'm just going to dull it a little bit. Now I'm using a flat brush, but I think I'm going to switch to my round brush. I'm going to have it fade to get lighter as it goes down. So darker at the top, that will give a little bit more atmospheric perspective. Now keep in mind, you did your color mixing chart with the panned colors. You haven't used the two paints yet. So you want to make sure that you try out a color if you're not sure. I did do a color mixing chart for these. I did it with a different class. So I kind of knew what Payne's Gray and Cerulean Blue would give me. Now remember, watercolor dries 20% lighter, so you're going to need to maybe, you know, see what it looks like and do another wash the next art class after it's dried. Or later on, if you do this first, you could go back in later. Alright, so I kind of am happy with the look that I achieved, and I can always, like I said, go back later. So what I might need to do now is I want to let this dry just a minute before I start adding the browns, or the brown's going to bleed into the sky backgrounds, and I'm not going to like that. I could decide to go over to the hair dryer and dry it up. Now the other thing is though, if there's a little blue into the bird, that's not as big of a deal as the brown into the sky, because the blue here in the bird could be a really lovely shadow color. So I could kind of actually use that while I have it as like the undertone. And again, I'm looking at my photo references and looking at where there's shadows and highlights. Now just like with the night sky, guys, so we have a lot of practice, right? You guys already know what you're going to do. You know that you need to create layers. You know that you might need to move the color around. You know that you might need to use blotting technique. So you want to keep in mind all the skills you've learned this year and apply them to your work. I am not going to add any salt or rubbing alcohol to my sky. I might add some salt to the birds when I get to that. Alright, so like I said, this would probably need to dry, but I'm just going to kind of move forward for demonstration purposes. I'm going to start adding in some light burnt sienna, which is like a brown. So if you're using your pan paint, you could use the brown. If you're using the tube paint, you could go in and you could use you know, the brown there. So I'm going to wipe off the center of my palette, and I'm going to use my brown, and I'm going to also need to change my water, because if I use the brown with this blue, it's probably not a good idea. So having like a backup water ready to go, or just go stop what you're doing and change your water. Now I'm going to look at these greens and these browns that exist, and I'm going to work from the lighter brown by adding yellow to my brown. And then I could do green later as like a second coat. But I'm just trying to make that yellowy color. And I'm just going to kind of apply it loosely, quickly, down in the bottom of my composition, down in here. My main goal is to get the first coat of paint done. My very first coat. Now remember, my whites were already protected, so I'm just kind of looking at that next tone. I'm going to add a little bit of this brown under here It will have to get a lot darker, but it's a good starting point. And like I said, you probably would want to go to the hairdryer or allow a little more drying time. I'm just trying to, you know, demonstrate for you. I'm using my round brush now because I have a little more control. But I'll probably want to go back in with some smaller detail brushes a little bit later. This one isn't too brown, like this color brown. I need to add some Payne's Gray to that. That was too much. So I'm just gonna take a little bit of my burnt sienna and a lot of water. Remember, water is how you lighten it. So this is more like the color. It's like a grayish brown. And that's kind of what I want for my undertone for that bird. And again, light to dark, working in layers. And also, wet into wet painting is really important. So your first wash, that's your opportunity to get that initial wet into wet painting accomplished. I have a really beautiful brown I made just with burnt sienna and a little bit of Payne's Gray. Alright guys, so I'm going to keep working on this and then show you what I come up with, and I think you guys get the point that you can go ahead and get started on your paintings. Just a reminder for due date, you guys have to have these done before you go on Christmas break, so you're going to need to work extra hard. You can totally get it done if you decide that you're going to work hard. Alright, have fun, get to work.